A city built on fear fell silent the moment the Mafia boss dropped to one knee. Not because someone had finally defeated him, but because the only woman he had ever loved had just looked him in the eyes and quietly asked for a divorce. Every assassin, every politician, every crime family believed they knew the most dangerous man alive. None of them knew the truth. The man who could order executions with a single glance couldn't survive 5 minutes without wondering if his wife still loved him. And when she walked away, the bloodiest war the city had ever seen wasn't started by rival gangs. It was started by one broken heart. But here's the part no one saw coming. She wasn't leaving because she had stopped loving him. She was leaving to save his life. The problem? He refused to let her go. And by the time he discovered the secret she had been hiding for months, it was almost too late. The most feared man in the country never raised his voice. He never needed to. One quiet order from Alessandro Moretti could erase an empire before sunrise. Politicians answered his calls before their own families. Billionaires waited outside his office. Rival bosses crossed themselves whenever his name appeared in conversation. People whispered that he had no heart, that nothing could scare him, that he had forgotten what love even felt like. They were wrong, because every single evening, no matter where he was, no matter who was begging for mercy, Alessandro checked one thing before making another decision. A single message from his wife. If she texted, "Drive safely," he smiled. If she reminded him to eat dinner, every bodyguard in the mansion relaxed, because they knew the boss would actually listen. And if she asked him to come home early, meetings ended immediately. No arguments, no negotiations. The king of the underworld obeyed one person. Her name was Elena. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't raised among criminals. She had once dreamed of becoming a children's doctor before life forced her to abandon medical school to care for her younger brother after their parents died. Even after marrying the richest and most feared man in the city, she never forgot who she had been. 3 mornings every week, she quietly visited children's hospitals. No reporters, no cameras, no publicity. She paid for surgeries that desperate parents couldn't afford. She bought books for children who would spend months in hospital beds. She remembered their birthdays. She knew them by name. Nobody outside those hospital walls knew who had been helping them. Elena insisted the donations remain anonymous. She believed kindness lost its meaning the moment it became a performance. The mansion staff adored her. The cooks secretly competed to prepare her favorite desserts. The gardeners smiled whenever she walked outside because she always stopped to admire their flowers. Even the heavily armed guards, men who had survived wars and prison riots, softened whenever she asked whether they had called their families recently. She remembered everyone. Birthdays, anniversaries, the names of their children. She carried warmth into a house built on fear. And somehow, she had carried that same warmth into Alessandro's heart. Nobody understood how, not even Alessandro himself. Years earlier, before Elena entered his life, he had been exactly what the world believed. Cold, unreachable, merciless. He trusted no one. He slept with a pistol beneath his pillow. He expected betrayal at every corner. Love wasn't weakness. To him, it simply didn't exist. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Not because of violence, because of an umbrella. He had been leaving a meeting when he noticed a young woman kneeling beside an injured stray dog in the middle of the road. Cars splashed muddy water around her. People ignored her. She ignored them all, holding a tiny umbrella over the trembling animal. She spoke softly while wrapping its injured leg with the sleeve she had torn from her own jacket. She didn't know Alessandro was watching. She didn't know armed men surrounded the street. She didn't care. The dog mattered. That single moment stayed with him for weeks. Later, he learned her name. Then he accidentally found reasons to cross her path. At least, that's what he told himself. In reality, every meeting had been carefully arranged by a man who suddenly couldn't stop thinking about a stranger. Months later, Elena discovered who he really was. She should have run. Instead, she looked at him with quiet disappointment. Not fear, disappointment. She told him something nobody else had ever dared to say. A man who rules through fear must be carrying unimaginable loneliness. Those words haunted him. Nobody had ever looked beyond the reputation. Nobody had wondered whether the monster had once been human. Elena did. Slowly, impossibly, Alessandro began changing. Not because she demanded it, because she inspired it. He donated money to orphanages without revealing his name. He created scholarships for children who had lost parents to gang violence. He quietly protected neighborhoods that rival organizations had terrorized for years. The public never knew. They only saw fewer shootings, safer streets, families returning home without fear. His empire remained powerful, but under Elena's influence, it became something different. His captains couldn't explain it. Some welcomed the change. Others believed compassion would eventually destroy everything Alessandro had built. One man believed exactly that. His name was Victor Romano. Officially, Victor was Alessandro's oldest advisor. For 15 years, he had managed finances, negotiated alliances, and solved problems before anyone else noticed them. Alessandro trusted him almost like family. Victor smiled often, spoke softly, never appeared ambitious, which made him dangerous. Because the most dangerous enemies rarely announce themselves. They wait, patiently, watching, planning. One rainy afternoon, Elena returned from the hospital to find an envelope waiting beside the front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside rested a single photograph. It showed Alessandro standing beside a beautiful woman. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. The image looked intimate, natural, almost affectionate. Elena turned the photograph over. 6 words had been written in black ink. He has been lying since day one. No signature, nothing else. She stared at the picture for nearly an hour. She searched her memory. Had Alessandro ever mentioned this woman? No. Had she ever seen her before? Never. For the first time since their marriage, uncertainty crept into her heart. Not because she believed the photograph, because she wondered why someone wanted her to. That evening, Alessandro arrived home later than usual. His white shirt was hidden beneath a dark coat. But as he removed it, Elena noticed dried blood staining one sleeve. He smiled gently, kissed her forehead, asked about her day. She answered every question. Yet something felt different. Tiny pauses, brief moments where his eyes drifted toward the window instead of meeting hers, as if his mind remained trapped somewhere outside the mansion. He excused himself to take an urgent phone call. Elena watched from the hallway. His expression hardened instantly. The warmth disappeared. For 30 seconds, he became the man the world feared. When he returned, the gentle smile came back as though nothing had happened. But Elena had seen both faces. And for the first time, she wondered which one carried the truth. Across the city, inside an abandoned warehouse, someone lit a cigar and smiled. The first crack had appeared, exactly as planned. Victor Romano folded another photograph and sealed it inside a fresh envelope. She's beginning to doubt him, he whispered. A nervous young messenger asked, "What if she tells the boss?" Victor smiled. "She won't. People who truly love someone never accuse them immediately. They investigate. And that's exactly where we'll catch her." Back at the mansion, Elena couldn't sleep. The photograph remained inside her bedside drawer. She wanted to ask Alessandro about it. She almost did. But every time she looked at him sleeping peacefully beside her, another thought stopped her. What if this was exactly what someone wanted? To plant suspicion, to destroy trust. Still, questions refused to disappear. The following afternoon, another envelope arrived. This one contained no photograph, only a note. "If you want the truth, come alone." Below the sentence was an address. No explanation, no signature, no time, just one warning. Tell no one. Elena stared at the note for a long time. Deep inside, she knew it could be a trap, but she also knew something else. If someone was trying to destroy her marriage, she had to find out why. Without telling Alessandro, without informing the guards, she quietly picked up her coat, stepped into the rain, and left the mansion alone. She had no idea. Someone had been waiting for that exact moment. The rain washed away Elena's footprints almost as quickly as she made them. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced over her shoulder. No guards, no black SUVs. For the first time since marrying Alessandro Moretti, she was completely alone. It felt strange. For years, invisible protection had surrounded her wherever she went. She rarely noticed it, but Alessandro's men always did. They watched from cafes, parked cars, rooftops, never close enough to make her uncomfortable, but always close enough to keep her safe. Tonight, there was no one, or so she believed. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, then disappeared. Another car slowly rolled past. Someone was watching, not to protect her, to make sure she reached the destination. The address led to an old church on the edge of the city. Its doors were open, Candles flickered inside, though the building had long been abandoned. Elena stepped cautiously through the entrance. "Hello." Only silence answered. Then she noticed a small wooden box resting on the front pew. Inside was another photograph. This one wasn't meant to make her jealous. It made her blood run cold. It showed Alessandro standing over 3 lifeless men. His hands were stained with blood. Written beneath the picture were 8 words. "How many secrets can love survive before it dies?" Before Elena could react, footsteps echoed behind her. She turned sharply, but there was no attacker. Only an elderly priest sweeping the floor. "I think someone left that for you," he said softly. "When? About 20 minutes ago. Did you see who it was?" The old man slowly shook his head. "They wore a hood. They knew you would come." Elena thanked him and hurried outside. The feeling in her chest had changed. This was no longer about inflying suspicion. Someone wanted her emotionally exhausted. Someone wanted her isolated. Someone knew exactly how deeply she loved Alessandro. At the same moment, across the city, Alessandro ended an emergency meeting 5 minutes early. He had no explanation, just a feeling. Every instinct he had trusted throughout his criminal life suddenly screamed that something was wrong. He reached for his phone. No new messages from Elena. Unusual. She always texted before sunset. He called the mansion. "Has my wife left?" The head of security hesitated. "Yes, sir." "When?" "About 40 minutes ago." "With how many guards?" Silence. "Answer me." "None, sir." Everything stopped. Alessandro slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in years, fear entered his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for her. His voice remained calm. Almost too calm. "Lock every gate. No one leaves. Find every security camera between the mansion and downtown. I want every recording. And call every captain." The room exploded into motion. Everyone knew what his calm voice meant. Someone had made a terrible mistake. Within 30 minutes, every Moretti safe house was activated. Phones rang nonstop. Cars flooded the streets. Private helicopters lifted into the night sky. Rival organizations watched in confusion. No one understood why the entire Moretti empire had suddenly awakened. Then the rumor spread. "The boss's wife is missing." Some laughed. They believed the mighty Alessandro had finally found his weakness. Others looked terrified, because they knew exactly what would happen next. A man with nothing left to lose is dangerous. A man protecting the woman he loves is unstoppable. Meanwhile, Elena arrived home. She froze. The front door stood open. Lights were on. Furniture had been overturned. Nothing valuable was missing. Only one thing had disappeared. Every photograph of her and Alessandro. Wedding pictures. Vacation memories. Family portraits. Someone had carefully removed every image proving they had ever been happy. Her heartbeat quickened. A voice behind her whispered, "Beautiful, isn't it?" She spun around. No one. Only another envelope resting on the dining table. Inside, one sentence. "If you want him to live, disappear." For the first time, Elena truly became afraid. Not for herself. For Alessandro. She remembered the photograph of him beside the unknown woman. The mysterious messages. The carefully arranged clues. Someone wasn't trying to separate them. Someone was preparing for something much worse. She made a decision that would break both their hearts. Without calling Alessandro, without leaving a note, she packed one small bag, took only her wedding ring, and quietly disappeared before his men could find her. She believed distance would protect him. She had no idea she had just walked into the enemy's plan. Hours later, Alessandro arrived at the mansion. He searched every room himself. He found the overturned furniture, the missing photographs, the envelopes. Then he entered their bedroom. Her favorite sweater was gone. One suitcase had disappeared. The closet door remained open. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, holding her wedding ring box. Empty. One of his captains stepped into the doorway. "We'll find her." Alessandro nodded slowly. "You already know who took her?" "No. They took something more valuable." "What?" "My piece." He stood. His expression became unreadable. "Close every port, every airport, every private runway. No one enters. No one leaves. And if any organization is hiding information," he paused, "they'll wish they weren't." The next 48 hours changed the city's history. Warehouses belonging to rival gangs were raided. Corrupt politicians vanished overnight. Hidden accounts were frozen. Criminal families surrendered information before anyone questioned them. Not because Alessandro threatened them, because they knew he wouldn't stop. Television stations reported an unexplained collapse in organized crime across the region. Nobody mentioned the real reason. The king had lost his queen, and the entire underworld was paying the price. But while Alessandro searched everywhere, Elena was hiding inside a remote mountain cabin owned by an old family friend. She believed no one knew she was there. She spent every day rereading the anonymous notes. Something didn't fit. If the goal had been exposing Alessandro, why encourage her to run instead of confronting him? Then she noticed something she had missed. A small symbol printed on the corner of every envelope. A silver wolf. She had seen it before, months earlier, inside Alessandro's private study. On a classified file he quickly closed when she entered. He hadn't hidden it because he distrusted her. He had hidden it because he wanted to protect her. Suddenly, everything became clear. The unknown woman in the first photograph. The coded messages. The disappearances. They were all connected to the Silver Wolf Syndicate, an organization even Alessandro rarely mentioned. Her hands trembled. Had she misunderstood everything? That night, she secretly returned to the city, not to confront Alessandro, to search his study for answers. She entered through a hidden side entrance she alone knew. The house was silent. Everyone believed she was still missing. Inside the locked study, she found the file. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first page contained a photograph, the same woman from the anonymous picture. But beneath the image, one sentence changed everything. Sofia Romano, undercover federal agent, and Alessandro Moretti's half-sister. Identity classified. Elena's breath caught. The photograph had been a lie. The apparent intimacy, the hidden meetings, the secrecy, everything had been part of an operation to keep Alessandro's only surviving relative alive. She sank into the chair, overwhelmed by guilt. She had doubted the one man who had never lied about loving her. Then she reached the final page. Her blood froze. Target number 1. Elena Moretti. Status: capture alive. Reason: only leverage capable of controlling Alessandro Moretti. At that exact moment, she heard a slow clap behind her. Victor Romano stepped out of the shadows, smiling. I was beginning to think you'd never find the truth. Elena turned toward the door. 3 armed men blocked the exit. Victor adjusted his gloves and smiled again. You know, the easiest way to catch the world's most dangerous man is to let his wife walk into the trap herself. The lights suddenly went out, and somewhere far across the city, Alessandro's phone rang. When he answered, a calm voice spoke only one sentence. If you ever want to see your wife alive again, come alone. For nearly 10 seconds after the call ended, Alessandro didn't move. The room remained silent. Every captain standing around the conference table waited for instructions. None came. Instead, Alessandro slowly placed his phone on the table. His face revealed nothing. But every man in the room knew exactly what that silence meant. The enemy had crossed the one line no one was supposed to cross. One of the captains finally spoke. Boss, give the order. Alessandro looked at him. No. The answer stunned everyone. No. If I send an army, they'll kill her before we reach the building. Another captain slammed his fist onto the table. It's a trap. I know. You can't go alone. I know. They'll kill you. Alessandro's expression remained calm. Maybe. Then he added the one sentence that none of them ever expected to hear. If my empire costs Elena her life, then it isn't worth keeping. The room fell completely silent. For years these men had fought beside him. They had watched him negotiate with presidents, outsmart rival syndicates, survive assassination attempts. But never had they seen him willing to surrender everything. Not for money, not for power, not for revenge, for love. Within the hour, Victor Romano's demands arrived. Every bank account, every weapons warehouse, every shipping route, every piece of the Moretti empire. In exchange, one life. Most crime bosses would have laughed. Some would have declared war. Others would have sacrificed the hostage to preserve their power. Alessandro signed every document, without negotiating, without hesitation. When one captain protested, Alessandro quietly replied, empires can be rebuilt. She can't. Far across the city, Victor stared at the signed papers and smiled. So, he really loves her. One of his men frowned. Isn't that what we wanted? Victor slowly shook his head. No. I wanted him angry. I wanted him reckless. I wanted him to choose his empire. But this, he looked down at the documents. This makes him unpredictable. Meanwhile, Elena sat bound to a chair inside an abandoned steel mill. Her wrists were tied, but her spirit wasn't. She had spent hours replaying every memory of the past week. Every photograph, every anonymous note, every lie, and every truth. One realization hurt more than anything else. She had doubted Alessandro for even a moment. Not because she lacked faith, because someone had learned exactly how to weaponize love. Victor entered the room carrying a small television. He switched it on. A live news broadcast filled the screen. Reporters announced the unbelievable. The Moretti criminal empire was collapsing. Warehouses had been abandoned. Businesses transferred. International accounts emptied. The once untouchable organization was disappearing before the world's eyes. Victor smiled. Look what your husband gave away. Elena stared silently. He chose you. Victor leaned closer. Doesn't that make you feel guilty? She looked directly into his eyes. No. It makes me afraid. Victor laughed. Afraid of what? Of what he'll do once he realizes you never intended to keep your promise. For the first time, Victor stopped smiling. Because she was right. He had never planned to release either of them. Revenge had always been the goal. Money was simply a bonus. Hours later, Alessandro arrived alone. Exactly as instructed. No convoy. No bodyguards. No visible weapons. The massive steel mill stood dark against the night sky. Victor greeted him from an elevated platform. I have to admit, I never imagined the great Alessandro Moretti would actually surrender. Alessandro said nothing. His eyes searched the building. Then he saw her. Elena. Bruised. Exhausted. Alive. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Victor applauded slowly. Beautiful. Even now. You only look at each other. Alessandro finally broke his silence. Let her go. Victor smiled. You first. Several armed men stepped forward. One by one, they searched Alessandro. No weapons. Exactly as promised. Victor laughed again. You really came defenseless. Alessandro calmly answered. No. Confusion crossed Victor's face. What do you mean? I came with the only weapon you've never understood. Victor frowned. And what's that? People. The lights suddenly exploded across the building. Every exit was surrounded. Not by gunmen. By the very people Victor believed had abandoned Alessandro. Captains. Drivers. Mechanics. Former rivals. Even men whose lives Alessandro had spared years before. They hadn't come because they were ordered. They came because they chose to. Loyalty built through fear disappears. Loyalty built through respect endures. Victor had spent years buying obedience. Alessandro had unknowingly earned devotion. Chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the steel mill. Men rushed in every direction. Alessandro sprinted toward Elena. One guard raised his rifle. Before he could fire, another of Alessandro's captains tackled him to the ground. Alessandro reached Elena and cut the ropes binding her wrists. For one brief moment, the world disappeared. Neither noticed the battle around them. Neither cared. Then a single gunshot shattered the silence. Victor, hidden behind a steel column, his pistol aimed directly at Elena. Alessandro reacted without thinking. He stepped in front of her. The bullet struck his shoulder. He staggered, but he remained standing. Victor fired again. This time Elena pushed Alessandro aside. The second bullet shattered a metal beam instead. The ceiling groaned. Years of rust finally gave way. Massive steel supports collapsed across the room. Victor tried to run. Too late. The falling structure trapped him beneath twisted metal. As emergency crews approached the abandoned mill, Victor looked toward Alessandro one final time. You lost everything. Alessandro shook his head. No. I kept the only thing that mattered. Months passed. The newspapers celebrated the mysterious downfall of one of the world's largest criminal organizations. Authorities discovered empty warehouses, abandoned accounts, missing records. No one understood why the empire had dissolved almost overnight. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Alessandro had walked away, not because he was defeated, because Elena had once told him something he never forgot. A man doesn't become strong by making the world fear him. He becomes strong when he no longer needs to. Together, they quietly sold what remained of their legitimate businesses. They established foundations for victims of organized crime. Hospitals, scholarship programs, shelters for children who had lost their families to violence. For the first time in decades, Alessandro built something that didn't require fear to survive. One quiet Sunday morning, nearly a year later, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of their modest countryside home. The infamous Mafia boss stood wearing an apron. Pancake batter covered one sleeve. A cookbook lay open on the counter. He frowned at the pan as another pancake folded into an unrecognizable shape. From the doorway, Elena watched with a smile she hadn't worn in months. She walked over, gently took the spatula from his hand, and laughed softly. Without saying a word, Alessandro stepped aside. The man who had once commanded thousands obeyed instantly. She mixed the batter again, showed him what he had done wrong. He listened as carefully, as if she were explaining the outcome of a billion-dollar negotiation. A few minutes later, the pancakes were finally perfect. Alessandro proudly placed them on the table. Elena took one bite, then smiled. They're still a little too sweet. He looked genuinely disappointed. I followed the recipe. She laughed. I know. You also added sugar twice. He rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. The former king of the underworld had no answer. She reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. They're perfect, because you made them. Outside, the world still whispered the name Alessandro Moretti with fear. People still told stories about the ruthless mafia boss who had once controlled an empire. But inside that little house, there was another story, one no newspaper would ever print, one no rival would ever believe. The most feared man in the city never argued over who was in charge. He never insisted on having the final word. He never minded losing the little battles. Because after everything they had survived, he understood something that power could never teach. The greatest victory of his life wasn't building an empire. It wasn't defeating his enemies. It wasn't becoming the most feared man in the underworld. It was waking up every morning beside the woman who had reminded him that even the hardest hearts could choose love over fear. And perhaps that's why the legends about Alessandro Moretti were never entirely true. People believed they feared him because of the empire he built. But the people who knew him best understood the real secret. The only person who had ever truly ruled the most feared mafia boss was the woman whose gentle heart had taught him how to become human again. And if you ever asked Alessandro whether giving up his empire had been worth it, he wouldn't answer with words. He would simply look across the breakfast table at his wife, smile, and everyone who saw that smile would already know the answer. The end.